Welcome back to the Skid Factory. Today we're going to talk about low mount turbos and what troubles you can have with them and how to avoid them. Our test case for this, or what prompted this discussion or video, is Denny's Liberty. It's a Gen 4 with a 6-cylinder in it. We did a video on this a while back. It's got twin low mount turbos on it. Woody will probably put the old video up here or something. No,
you've got to point to your left top, where you were pointing before.
Why?
Because that's only the spot you can put it.
Yeah. Anywho, so we put GDR turbos on some custom manifolds on this thing. No problem there. We designed the whole thing and sort of cast the manifolds and all that and fabricated the rest. And we immediately had intermittent problems with oil scavenging out of the turbos. There's a very, very long story involved in it, but we learnt stuff. I've done heaps of low mount turbo stuff before on a lot of different cars, a lot of different turbos, and mostly with success. Never really had too many dramas with it if it's done right, but this one was particularly difficult. One thing, probably the first thing that we discovered was that I'd never done 2 turbos before. I'd only ever done 1 low mount, and we had problems with the single pump that we had on it, which was one of these. That's like a brass spur gear pump. It would bias one turbo, so it would just suck out of the turbo that was easiest to get out and leave the other one alone. So you end up with one turbo that was just not being scavenged from. So the ways around that, in our case, we just changed it to 2 VDO pumps. The reason for that is because the turbos were already so low, we couldn't drain them into a common sump. So if you've got twin low mounts and they're on a V8 or something and they're sort of lower than they can gravity drain, but still quite high, like on a LS or something like that, you can then just drain those 2 into a common sump or plenum and then suck out of that, and that will work perfectly fine with a single pump. But if you're like this, if you try and tee them together, we found that it just biases whichever's the easiest one to pull out of and leaves the other one alone, and you end up with the turbo filling up with oil. So our solution in this case was these VDO pumps. I've used these before and have had problems with them, but in hindsight, the problems were due to radiant heat. So they work very well and they're nice and quiet and they're very compact, but you've got to keep them away from any radiant heat, otherwise it sort of melts the inside of them and the magnets inside the housing fall off. And yeah, I've got $2,500 worth of VDO pumps to prove that point. So yes, they do work, but keep them away from any heat source. And obviously, maybe it's not obvious, these aren't designed to pull up a long way. You need to keep them as low as you possibly can in line with the exit point from the turbo sump. I think we've talked about servo sumps before.
Yeah.
But I'll do it again just because that's what we're talking about. A sump is needed on the bottom of a turbo if you're doing low mount applications. The reason for that is this pump has got a draw out of that turbo. It's not designed to suck through the middle of a core that ends in most cases, a 1 mil orifice. So it's basically trying to pull a vacuum, and that's not what they're designed to do. So what we do is use a sump. So it's a virtual gravity drain. So as far as the turbo is concerned, it's gravity draining just like it would if it was up the top, but it's draining into this little reservoir, which is then pulled by the pump.
You got some sumps on your bench there.
I've got a couple of different designs here that Denny's made for various applications. So that's quite a large one. It gravity drains as normal. The turbo doesn't know any different. We pull from here into our scavenge pump, and here is a breather, and that breather goes up to the breather system, or in this case it goes into a catch can. And the reason for the breather is that so the pump can displace oil and it's replaced with air. So it's a sort of basic requirement of a pump is that you can't pull a vacuum. So there's a few different designs of various shapes, but they've all got a breather and an outlet.
Are you going to sell these, Alan? We get that question lots and lots and lots.
I'd love to sell these, but that fits one turbo in one specific clocking position, and there's your problem. If you clock the turbo a different way to what we've clocked, it won't fit. So it's really a difficult thing to produce this for multiple applications. So that's why we don't sell them. They're made for a specific app.
You don't really need to have that much design in them though too. You can
Not
probably...
really. These are made because Denny's a pattern maker and he can make stuff like that quite easily.
You could have like a bit of 2-inch pipe with caps on it. And
Yeah. So, yeah, when I initially started making turbo sumps, I just used to fabricate them out of bits of square tube and stuff like that. And it's the same thing. It's just heaps more work than this. This is, as with most casting, more initial work, but less work in the long run if you want to make more than one. So that's got the pump side of things covered. 2 pumps, 1 per turbo, unless you can drain them into a common. The next thing we came across was these engines have massive amounts of oil pressure. So we're talking 120 psi when they're cold. So there's a huge amount of oil flow, and it just overwhelms the capacity of the reservoir. So to get around that, we firstly tried restricting, so 1 mil restrictor. 1 mil sounds tiny, and you'd think that it'd do something, but it doesn't. It's not enough. We then went to a oil pressure control valve specifically for a turbo. So it's like a relief valve that reduces the oil pressure out of the engine and returns some of it back into the engine. So it's sort of a dump system, much like a fuel pressure valve, regulator. It's an oil pressure regulator instead. So that's actually mounted up the top, so we can't see it at the moment. But if you've got a high oil pressure engine, that will probably be a good idea to use one of those. Just do it straight up. They're not that expensive. It regulates it to 40 psi, which is pretty standard sort of oil pressure for both ball bearing and journal bearing turbos. So that plus restrictors if it's a ball bearing turbo, and that will keep the amount of oil actually coming out here at any one time to a sort of a manageable level for these pumps. The next problem that you can have is, particularly with a setup like this, after the engine's switched off, your pumps turn off, oil is in the lines to the turbos. So gravity forces the oil down, and it still enters the turbos after you've turned off everything, fills up these, and then when you go to start it again, you're starting with a system that's already chock as full. So the way around that is by the use of a residual valve, which I have found it. So this is a residual valve that I bought from somewhere, I can't remember. It's basically a ball and spring that shuts the oil supply from going downwards. Once you get over 10 psi of oil pressure, it just pushes the ball and spring open. Your normal lubrication activity happens, flows through. And then when the engine switches off and the oil pressure drops, that spring will shut and it'll stop any residual oil in the lines from flowing through and ending up in the sump. So Oleo Web, that's called. I think I just Googled it.
Didn't we change spring tensions and stuff in them though too?
No, well John actually made some custom made ones out of bits and pieces and trickery and John things, but I'd order them because I didn't know how long they'd take to get here, but John's work. So a lot of this stuff that I've been doing here is actually was, I guess, pioneered by Porsche when they did the 930 Turbo in the 70s, late 70s. When you look back through, I actually found a heap of old technical stuff on the internet about this exact same things. They all use this residual valves, sumps and pump, which was actually, it wasn't an electric pump, it was a mechanical scavenge. But so they probably found all these issues back in the 70s when they first turboed the 930, which was hanging down here somewhere, a massive K27. So once we got all through all that stuff, we eventually found out that the turbos were buggered. They were just like $200 second-hand turbos that I got off one of the Hoffs mates. And we found that there was boost pressure inside the sumps. So we deleted those turbos into the bin. They were stock R34 GDR ball bearing turbos, so not the same as what a current Garrett ball bearing turbo was, and I couldn't find them new because they worked really well. They were perfect for the engine, but we couldn't find any, so we couldn't buy new ones, and we didn't want to buy more second-hand ones because that didn't want to end up in the same issue. So we bought Dash 5 GDR replacement turbos, which are a Garrett 2860 RS. Bolted them on. I've modified everything, of course. It's got stuff welded onto it, and instantly came up against more issues. Nothing to do with oiling or anything like that. That all worked perfectly. Now we had massive compressor surge. I've got a bit of audio there that Woody might be able to splice into the video. It was ridiculous. Like you couldn't drive it. It'd start coming on to boost, and the two turbos would just be chatting to each other. Do 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 do. It'd play havoc with the airflow meter, which is on the pressure side. So you couldn't tune the car because the airflow meter was playing up like it just was impossible. So we tried. I hadn't actually come across anything this bad before. I've heard surge on single turbo stuff before, but this was something else. So we attacked it first of all with a blower valve, which it did not have on it. I don't usually use blower valves unless they're super high boost stuff or it's going to mess with the airflow meter, which in this case it doesn't really mess with it because it's on the pressure side. So we got a valve and put the loosest spring we could in it and hung it on the cold side of the intercooler piping, and that moved it. So it was happening at X amount of RPM and now it was happening at Y, so it made a difference. Then Denny discovered that if you pulled the air intakes off, this is the original compressor cover that was on the turbo, had 2.5 inch intakes. If we took that off, you could kind of drive it and it wouldn't surge so much. So we made a whole bunch of different intake sizes and sort of tried to take out all the, like any changes of size, like make it all smooth progression into the compressor. And once again, that moved it. It moved it from X to Y to Z, but it was still there. So then I got onto the internets, which is occasionally handy, and got onto a page full of GDR dudes, and they said, oh yeah, those turbos are renowned for that. These are 2860-5s. There's a few different types of replacement GDR turbo. They do it on GDRs as well. So I was like, oh shit, I really should have researched this, but I didn't really know that much about GDR replacements at the time. So one of the things one of the guys said was to separate the outlets from the turbos until they get to the intercooler, which we did. As you can see here, there's a division plate in here, and we just made a whole new pair of pipes. It used to have a merge here. So we did that. So then you've now got basically one intercooler per turbo, which is also acts as a giant sort of cushion for the whole setup to stop them from trying to reverb into each other. That also changed it. So where were we? X, Y, Z.
Back to A.
We're back to A now. So everything we did moved the surge around but didn't get rid of it. So by now we're getting pretty desperate, and Denny's starting to look on Gumtree for second-hand turbos and stuff like that, because the original ones were perfect. You never heard a peep out of them. They worked really well. But I was thinking about it, and I thought it probably needs anti-surge covers, and I know they don't use anti-surge covers on GDRs just because they're bolt-ons, and this doesn't facilitate for it. And the bolt-on turbo market for GDRs is pretty, there's not many options, because they are always obsessed with having these 2-bolt flange setup, which is factory GDR, so the piping could bolt on. So don't buy 2860-5s for your GDR, because they don't work properly. So, as I said, I was like, they probably just need anti-surge covers. So I went looking, and I couldn't find the right cover to go on them, because their 2860R and RS are a different trim. So I found the R spec from like eBay, China, whatever. Bought 2 of them. It's smaller, and when they turned up, sent them to John and Denny made us sort of a template out of stuff to trace this profile, and then John machined them in a lathe, and then hand finished the curve, bolted them on, welded all the stuff on them again. This is the 3rd time, and it was magically gone. Well, it's not magically, it's scientifically gone. So anti-surge, it's literally anti-surge. It literally stops the compressors surging when basically you're pushing them off the airflow map till they're pushing more air than the engine can swallow, and in this case they're pulsing at separate intervals. So this bank fires, that bank fires, so they end up chuffing into each other and making all sorts of racket. Can we hear that clip again? Do, 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 do. So fixed. This is probably, I don't know, probably 3 months of pulling this thing apart and putting it back together and changing things and welding things on, and yeah, all sorts of stuff. So it was a bit of an adventure, and for me it was like, I've done heaps of this, low mount turbos, heaps of turbo stuff obviously as well. I've never come across this, but it just goes to show you that shit happens and you're never too old to learn. So now we know. So now I'm passing on the knowledge. This has done about 20,000 Ks with the turbos on it, or not these turbos, but turbos. Hasn't blown up yet. Goes pretty well. We haven't put it on dyno or anything. It's only been road tuned, but does the job.
Are you selling those manifolds?
I'm not selling them, but Danny is. He's got some made. So if you're a Subaru Tragic, but you like 6-cylinder noises and you got one of these and you want to turbo it, just send us a email at sales@theskidfactory.com if you're interested. Disclaimer, they do not come as a kit. It's just the manifolds and whatever turbo sump suits your application. So they are designed for GDR turbos, but you can put a normal T25 on it if you want. They're just a bit bigger. And obviously space is a premium down here because there's road. So yeah, you get the manifolds and the sump for the turbo.
And you have to watch this video again.
And then you've got to listen to what I've just said, otherwise you'll go through all manner of difficulties. But it works, and sometimes you just got to be resilient. So anyway, I hope this helps people if they're thinking about doing low mounts. It's pretty common nowadays. There's a lot of people are just tolerant of smoke, like the exhaust filling up with oil every now and then because they mess things up. But if you do all of those steps that I've mentioned, implement that, it will work reliably and you'll never have a problem. So I hope this helps people. That's all I've got. People complain about me talking all the time. So see you next time.
You're going to thank them for watching or not?
Oh, thanks for watching. They've probably turned off halfway through, bro. Turbos, pumps, oil in the exhaust.
Give it a free rev.